Team Fortress 2 is one of the most classic and well-known multiplayer FPS games that exist to this day. With a community base that spans tens of thousands of concurrent players per day, nearly 17 years after its release, and even having constant community events and tournaments for everyone to take part in. Typical Colors 2 is a well-known FPS game on Roblox that's inspired by TF2 and also manages to maintain a steady and active community even 10 years after its release, with an active wiki and is pretty similar overall. However, the topic of this video is one that's been all over my first video I made on Typical Colors 2, with comments usually consisting of what I heard, TF2 remake, what I seen, TF2 ripoff. That Roblox game suck cop. That Roblox game. That Roblox game suck copy TF2, even Avatar looks stupid. And even, man, just play Real TF2. So in this video, I'll be putting these two games in a head-to-head battle to get a true answer as to which one is actually better, the original Team Fortress 2 or the Roblox remake, Typical Colors 2. To start, we have to come up with a few categories to rank for each game, and with each category, one earns a point, and at the end, we'll tally up the points and see who actually wins. The categories for this topic is overall gameplay, hardware needed to play the game, weapon selection, the cost or time needed to earn said weapons and items, total map selection, and finally, total game modes. And while I would add the community category, it's a bit hard to rank since they both have their good and bad aspects and can be pretty subjective. But regardless, we have 6 categories to talk about and 2 games to explore. Let's see which one's actually the best. Starting off with overall gameplay, we'll go ahead and do TF2 first to get a good baseline as to what we should be comparing towards, and I'll preface the fact that I haven't played in a few years, so bear with the gameplay. To start, the initial movement I'm having a really good time with. It's smooth and feels really easy to control, as well as being pretty fast when playing Scout. The graphics look really good for a source game from over 17 years ago, but there have been updates, so it's not like this is year 1 graphics of course. But I'll be honest, some of the weapons in this game feel pretty difficult to use on some of the characters, but it could easily be attributed to me just being really bad at the game. Even though I didn't have a ton of weapons to select from initially, especially on Scout, I still ended up performing pretty well for the first match, getting some kills here and there, and just getting an overall feel of the game. I decided to try and use as many characters as possible, just so I could get a better understanding of what aspects of the gameplay are good, and what could be a little more improved. But obviously my words would mean nothing since I rarely play the game and don't have a better grasp on how the game could actually be improved. The weapons I end up swapping between are really consistent, especially when I had used the Tomislav on Heavy, just absolutely shredding everybody that came near me. I found myself leaning pretty far towards Heavy and Scout, since I wasn't doing the best on a majority of the other characters. I will say, for not playing the game in what felt like forever, it was super easy to get back into the groove of a source game and being able to perform as well as I did. I love the movement, style, and overall gameplay, but now it's time for the comparison. Typical Colors 2 has a difficult enemy to compare against in terms of gameplay now, so let's get started. Starting off with the graphics, I don't think it falls anywhere close to TF2 just for the map style and overall look of it, but the weapon and character models are incredibly detailed, and I would easily pit that against TF2 for a rough comparison. Going into the gameplay, I feel like some characters are a lot slower in contrast to TF2's base movement speed, but it can be offset by some items to gain some temporary speed boosts. As for the weapons, they're pretty good in terms of the consistency and damage, being able to get good amounts of damage off even at a far distance in shotgun's sake. Some of the map layouts feel a bit linear in their pathways and places you can go, sometimes causing you to be camped right outside of spawn, but I know some maps in TF2 have similar issues, so I can't really get upset by it. One thing to note is that I find rocket jumping 1,000 times easier in TC2 in comparison to TF2, just in terms of how far you can travel and how fast you fly through the air. While I wasn't playing amazing throughout the 2 matches that I played, especially with my lack of total playtime in both games, I still found it pretty fun overall. The weapons were nice to use, it felt a little more balanced in some aspects, and it had some other parts of the gameplay that were quite enjoyable. However, which one is better in terms of gameplay? Well, to be honest, I'd have to give the point to TF2. Even though it has some issues, it looks, plays, and feels like the better game in comparison to Typical Colors 2. But gameplay isn't everything. We also have 5 more categories to go through, so let's move on to the next topic, hardware needed to play the game. This topic will be a bit subjective since both games don't require a beefy PC, but since my computer has some pretty decent specs, I didn't really feel any graphical or performance issues throughout my time playing both games. So here's how we'll do it. We'll simply compare the specs needed to run each game. The specs for the average Roblox game recommends a PC that is less than 5 years old, which can be a bit subjective, but basing it on the processor, it recommends something later than 2005 with a clock speed of 1.8 GHz or better, 1 GB of RAM, and running Windows 10 or 11, and at least 20 MB of storage space. Not bad. Now let's see how TF2 compares. TF2 recommends a Pentium 4 processor with a 3.0 GHz clock speed or better. Mind you, the Pentium 4 in that model released back in 2008. It also recommends 1 GB of RAM, 15 GB of storage space, but it can technically be run on Windows 7, making it pretty widely available to your grandma who's still running Windows 7 on her super old laptop that has 500 different viruses on it. Overall, it comes to a super close tie. On one hand, TF2 requires more space and a CPU that's a little more recent than what Roblox's absolute minimum recommends, same RAM, and I won't really count the OS support in this category. But one thing that does set it apart is that you can probably still play TF2 on a GeForce 6600 for the low cost of $135, but Roblox recommends a GPU/system that's more recent and not older than 5 years old, and the GPUs that were coming out in 2020 was the 30 series, and those come to a whopping over $1,000. So if we're talking about price points and overall availability to a potential player, TF2 obviously takes the point. But like I said, it is super subjective since you can easily play Roblox on a lower end PC and even mobile and still run it perfectly fine. Which brings us to the next category, weapon selection. If we're talking the total amount of weapons for each game, including reskins of other weapons, Team Fortress 2 technically has 209 weapons available to purchase and use. Now, if we're talking typical Colors 2 total weapon count, they have a slight lead with a total of 241 weapons. So if we're ranking just based on the total number of weapons, typical Colors 2 will get the point for that one. A short segment, but we're trying to cover all the bases here. While still being on the topic of weapon selection, it brings us to the average/total cost of the weapons available. We'll start with typical Colors 2 this time since it's pretty easy to get an accurate number. Each weapon on TC2 costs around $10 of in-game currency, with bundles being available for $15, and you can actually get a great deal when it comes to buying 3 weapons for $15 as opposed to $10 for a single one. While you can purchase in-game currency to purchase the weapons in the shop, it's not needed since you can just complete contracts and play the game to earn said currency. I would honestly just give the point to typical Colors 2 now, but I gotta explain how the other side works. A lot of the weapons in TF2 range pretty heavily in price, with things like modifiers and effects making a simple $2 weapon cost upwards of $200. But there are also a lot of weapons that cost as low as 10 cents each, so there are definitely ways to increase your inventory and weapon selection. But even some of the basic versions of the better weapons can even go up pretty high in price. But you can also purchase things like bundles, crates, and more for an okay price, I guess. But I think the ability to earn every single weapon through in-game currency rather than paying real money for it makes me lean a lot more towards TC2's side for this point. Now it's time to compare the map selection on each game. And since I can't rank every single map that both games have, we'll just go based on what the total amount of maps are inside of each game. And yes, I will be including the maps from the other game modes like Tug of War, Man vs. Machine, and game modes as well as maps that aren't technically available to play anymore. We'll start with TF2 for this section, and the total number of maps across all of the game modes was actually pretty surprising, with the total amount for TF2 coming to a whopping 221 maps. Mind you, a few of these maps might now be unavailable to play due to limited time game modes and stuff that has since been removed, but this total count is absolutely insane in comparison to how many maps TC2 actually has. And moving into that, the same rules will apply for typical Colors 2, with the exception of scrapped maps and developer maps since they're technically inaccessible on release and don't ever plan on being accessible to players. So after manually hand counting each map across each game mode, the total count for TC2 comes to a much lower total with 170 maps. So with our number-based point system in mind, TF2 is going to take the win on this front. And now for the final category, total game modes. With the current score sitting at 3 for TF2 and 2 for TC2, it's a really close matchup and there's only one way to tell who's going to win. Starting this category off with TC2, the game modes are as follows: Arena, Attack/Defense, Capture the Flag, Control Points, King of the Hill, Payload, Player Destruction, and Team Deathmatch. For special game modes, Infection, Medieval, Prop Hunt, Team Deathmatch, and versus bosses. I left out none in the wiki list since it technically doesn't consider it a game mode at all, leaving us with a total count of 14 game modes that exist in the game. Now, for the final count and the decider between TF2 being better than TC2 or coming to a tie, the game modes for TF2 is as follows: Capture the Flag, Territorial Control, Control Point, Payload, Arena, King of the Hill, Payload Race, Pastime, Special Delivery, Robot Destruction, Player Destruction, Manpower, Man vs. Machine, versus Saxton Hale, and finally, Zombie Infection. This brings the total count for TF2's side to a photo finish lead with 15 total game modes, just one over what typical Colors 2 has. This brings the total points to 4 for Team Fortress 2 and 2 for typical Colors 2. This means that TF2 is the undoubted winner of this matchup. Through scrutinous investigation and comparison, typical Colors 2 is unfortunately not better than Team Fortress 2. But even though TF2 is technically better, TC2 is still a wonderfully fun game and is definitely more accessible in terms of being able to run on mobile devices and has some game mechanics that aren't something you can just brush off. So that's the game. If you enjoyed this looking comparison into typical Colors 2 and Team Fortress 2 and want to see more stuff like this, leave a like and subscribe down below. Also comment what you think the better game is and if I was right in my comparisons or a maniac for calling TF2 the winner. Consider becoming a member by hitting the join button down below to gain access to a bunch of different perks, as well as a spot in the end member credits at the end of every single one of my videos. Thanks again to you for watching. I've been Meeko, and I will catch you in the next video.